Good evening. I call this Iowa City Community School Board meeting on Tuesday, September 24th, 2019 to order. My name is Janet Godwin, and I want to thank those in the audience, those watching on YouTube, and those following on Twitter for joining us tonight. I'll start by introducing those at the table with me. To my right, Superintendent Steve Murley, Directors Ruthina Malone, Phil Hemingway, Lori Rotland. To my left, Paul Ressler, Sean Eastham, JP Clausen, and Kim Colvin, Recording Secretary. The public is reminded that if they wish to speak, they need to complete a speaker form found at the table in the lobby and turn it in. During community comment, persons may speak to the board about topics relevant to the district. All community comment directed at non-agenda items and agenda items shall take place at the beginning of the meeting during the community comment section of the agenda. And we will move straight into community comment. First up, we have Olivia Barker, followed by Charlie Eastham.
I'm Olivia Barker. I'm president of West High Democrats Club, and we want to thank you for making efforts to keep our schools safer from school shooters, including locking doors at West High and creating threat assessment teams. Last year, you assured the community that you would not be putting armed officers or school resource officers in schools. But since then, we heard that the School Safety Advisory Committee suggested that SROs be placed in schools. We are here today to urge you to keep your stance against SROs. In schools where SROs are present, student behavior that should be handled by administration is more likely to involve police interventions, which leads to higher arrest rates and increases the school-to-prison pipeline. Arrests are also more likely to be for disorderly conduct charges instead of offenses that truly threaten students and staff. The Center on Juvenile Justice reported a few examples of inappropriate action taken against students by SROs. A 14-year-old disabled student in Florida was arrested and charged with felony robbery after stealing $2 from a classmate. And in another example, a 14-year-old was arrested and detained for violating a school's dress code. SROs exceed their power like this often, and there is no federal legislation regarding training or certification for SROs, and no laws in Iowa regarding this issue. We acknowledge that we do not have an alternative solution. We believe that the only way we can be truly safe is to have common sense gun reform so that people who want to cause harm cannot get access to automatic weapons. We believe that adding armed police officers to our schools will only cause great harm to students with disabilities and students of color. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Charlie Eastham, followed by Mazahir Salih.
Charlie Eastham, 953 Canton Street in Iowa City. I'm here in part because I'm a member of the Black Voices Project, Center for Worker Justice Board of Directors. And in those activities that I engage in, I've heard a number of times in a number of settings from people of color that they are not in favor of the current proposals for even the threat assessment teams that would have uniformed police officers, sworn officers as member of the team on an ongoing basis. In my thinking, I think the district would consider school safety measures that are inclusive in their overall scope and that are widely accepted by members of the school community, students, parents, teachers, other staff, as well as members of the broader community. I think we should definitely pursue that kind of agreement in our approaches to enhancing school safety, and I think we should not take action until we have that kind of broad support. So I would hope you would ask that you would consider that aspect of how to look at school safety measures as you go forward in your deliberations tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Mazahir, followed by Melva.
Hi, good evening. My name is Mizar Sada. I live here in Iowa City. I'm a community organizer at the Center for Worker Justice, where we really have a lot of members who are immigrants and people of color. And I think SROs will be affected those people more than any other people in the community. And I will keep it short. Really, we just, as a community, we ask all the parents there, and I ask my own community about this. And I don't think, as a member of the Sudanese community, all the people there, they saying that this is not something that they want to see, and they don't want their children to have SSOs at the school because we know how those going to be targeting. And also, I just want to highlight that if we really have money to hire SROs, we can have money to do like a lot of resources that they can give a support to the children, like mental health resources and a lot of other resources that will make the children safe, feel safety at the school. And also, I don't think that our children need SROs. They need support from the schools, and I believe if they find good supports for any problems at the school, they most likely do good. But I asked my son about this, and I just found out he was like, "What? Why we have there is someone come all the time to the school and go, but why should I have someone there?" And also, as I told you, as a Center for Worker Justice, we have a lot of people, they want to keep their information confidential. If you hire somebody, that means they have access to the information for the children at the school district. Now, if the police want to have information, they have to come through different channels and come to you first before you can release any information. It's up to you to release all the information that they need. But if they become really employee of the school district, they have access to that. And now, I don't trust that information could be transferred between the department and the school. I hope you are not going to do this and think about another way. I understand that the safety of our children is our priority. I want to go to my job and feel that my kids are safe at the school. Think about something else. Yes, back up a little bit and figure out what can you do to make sure our kids are safe at school. Thank you.
Thank you, Mazahir. Melva, followed by Julie Van Dyke.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to come again to ask you not to implement this service. We haven't really got any feedback, I feel like, from the panel as to what you're really going to do. And I feel like that you're too quiet to respond to what we're bringing forth to you. As a suggestion, I know you're going to do something. That's beyond us. But what I would like to suggest as an alternative and less evasive procedure to implement into the schools is that you put in security like you have at the airport. Therefore, you're scanning everybody's carry-on products, and I feel like that it would be a much safer alternative than to have a policeman in there that sees a kid fidgeting, killing. And when it was just, maybe he had a bug bite or something at that particular time that make him jerk, Policemen, they shoot first, kill second, and then they oh, it was in the line of duty, resisting arrest. So I'm imploring you to consider that there is an alternative to your decision to put these people in here. And because that kid brought that AK-15, whatever that ammo was, and crap, that's not something that somebody every day has at their disposal. That kid had that thing in his house. His dad bought it, trained him at the age of 4 before he could even spell his name correctly. So this is something that's that is taught to children. There's no fear unless you're taught a fear. We were always taught, be careful, don't walk over here because there's probably a snake. When you grow up in Oklahoma in the rocks, you're gonna run across a snake, tarantulas. Just walk past it or just let it cross in front of you. So do consider the fact that you do have an alternative rather than putting somebody in there with a gun. The Social Security people, you go in their building, there's an officer there, he asks you to put the stuff in the basket, and you go on about your business. I think that that would work in the schools as well. And I would like to hear some feedback from the panel. We come here, and we will continue to come here until we feel like that there has been reached a safe alternative to patrolling the schools.
Thank you, Melva. Julie, followed by Roy Porter.
What grant? What grant? We haven't seen it. Have you shown the public the grant yet? The answer that I saw to the request to see the grant was that the district administrator who answered it said that it couldn't be produced because it had been submitted online. What kind of crap is that? Really? Really? You know, the first mention that any of us in the public that I know of that heard of this grant was when it popped up on an agenda for the 723 work session as if it was just a discussion item. And fancy that, I get there and we find right out of Janet's mouth, we're here for an update. So you must have known something about it before that. How come we didn't? This district has a trust issue. And what do? You pop on another threat assessment team item today, and the only thing attached to that as of this morning at around 6 a.m. was a letter from the principals saying they want guns and they want the SROs in the schools. You haven't even provided any public documentation. The only public engagement that I've seen that you've had on it is your sham safety committee that was a stacked deck that Merle got to appoint everybody on. And you separated the positives, possible positives, from the ones that might not be interested in it. You separated them so they couldn't talk. Yeah, I saw the meeting minutes, notes from that, where they actually say how excited they are about sending SROs out to people's families' homes to ask if they have guns and make assessments about whether there are things that can contribute to a threat there without a warrant. People need to understand this isn't about armed police officers and guns, with guns in the schools. We have those. And those are necessary sometimes, and that's not what I'm fighting. I'm fighting this district administration's attempt, in my opinion, to slip in SROs, which are school district employees, so that you can all blur the lines between FERPA and what a police officer is. You cannot have police officer employees in these buildings because it immediately allows you to have a pipeline of any information that this district deems necessary or likable or just for fun, for that matter, with no accountability, and it goes right to the police departments. Okay? The stuff that you're talking about putting in this database, I'm hearing you got a database kind of going already. I hope you don't, because if it's got my kids' IEP stuff in it, I demand to see it immediately. You know, you pop something on for this meeting. The only things that I saw for community engagement was that the safety committee held 2 meetings where people could come and talk in the public library. And I've got your screenshots of the meeting notes from that. And right where it asks where the public engagement was and what questions where it was, on both of them it says none. You're gonna bring this up again on another agenda with no information provided. The public hasn't seen the grant. You haven't had any public engagement on it whatsoever. And I love the principal letters. You know what they don't mention in there? They don't mention families and the public. You know, we all need to work together to make our schools safer. All of us. And you need to include us. It needs to be transparent. It needs to be open. It needs to be extensive. And you need to back out of this entirely because you're being pushed today because the sky is falling. To push today to vote for something that we haven't even seen yet. Back it up. It is wrong to step out with this. Do not vote to support anything with this today. You back it up and we start over again and we make it a community engagement opportunity to build trust in this district, which you sorely need when your own teachers won't fill out the surveys you have and you show that the improvement after your implicit bias training is actually worse than it was 3 years ago when you started. You have a trust issue. Make this about building trust. Vote to approve. Nothing today until you engage with the public and we all work together to decide what makes our kids safe.
Thank you, Julie. I'm just going to remind the public that the discussion tonight is not a vote. We are discussing a threat assessment agenda. There's no vote, there's no action item, there's no voting taking place tonight, just to be clear with the community in the room and watching tonight. Royce-Ann, you're up next, followed by Annie Tucker.
Hello, Royce-Ann Porter, 136 Iowa City. I'm up here. I cannot believe that I'm standing here once again. When I heard of the incident last week at Tate High School, it was disappointing. And I knew, I was like, okay, here we go again. This is totally going to be, here we go back on this SRO. Here we go. We get away from the SRO. I watched the news last night and I see the chief of police. I feel like I've been bamboozled because when I sit and I've had many discussions with the chief and we're talking about this threat assessment team, I don't understand. I was all on board because you're telling me that this threat assessment team are going to be a police officer, mental health professionals, social workers, teams of people working together so that when our students got in trouble, whatever help they needed, these people were going to be the ones who come in and give them the resources that they need. And I'm so confused. When I say I've been bamboozled, I've been bamboozled. I've been lied to. 1 minute you say you don't want SROs, and the next minute you're saying you want SROs, and the next minute it's time to talk about SROs. No. I sat in the last meeting and listened to the presentation. In the presentation, they talked about collaborations that they have not even done. I sat with juvenile courts for 2 hours today because juvenile courts, once the police is called on a kid, it's out of the police's hand. Everything is turned over to juvenile courts. Juvenile courts have a protocol that they follow, which they put into place to make sure that that kid, even if he's in detention, when they bring him home, he has a monitor on. He's able to go to school. We want to make sure he's getting all the resources, whatever it may be, counseling, whatever. They put all this into place, and yet they have not even been talked to as far as a collaboration. I'd say the same thing with the Crisis Mobile, the Crisis Center. Nobody. Who are the people that's supposed to be a part of this threat assessment besides a police officer being in the administration building? Who are these people? Who is this threat assessment team? Where are they? He had DHS up there. I talked to Lynette Jacoby. They're not involved in this process, have not even been talked to. Who is this threat assessment team? Where are they? I was on board. I was like, yeah, that sounds good. A kid get in trouble, they're going to get the help that they need. A kid get in trouble, he don't even get arrested, he let go, because what, they don't have probable cause. You got a gun in a bag. And yet you say that the principal did a great job. The principal was supposed to, that's her job as an administrator. But why was this kid let go? Now he can't be found. Now all of a sudden here we go with SROs again. Come on, y'all. We got to have some community involvement. The community is very concerned. It's time for us to have some community conversations. With Julius right, let's back this thing up and sit down and talk. Let's have a dialogue. Let's talk about what's really going on in this community and why is it that SROs are needed in our schools? I don't know about y'all, but I know on national TV yesterday, all day long, that's all you saw, SROs in Florida. Arrested a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. Make it make sense. I don't understand why SROs has become saviors in our community. What if the SRO is in the bathroom when something's happening? You know, I don't understand. It's time, I'm gonna leave, but it's time for our administrators to take on their buildings, pull up their big pants, and do what they need to do as far as discipline.
Thank you, Royce-Ann. Tucker, followed by Stephanie VanHooten.
Very short. Annie Tucker, 1425 Oak Lawn Avenue, Iowa City. Our 4 kids went to Iowa City schools. So I'm here to say no officers in the schools and no officers in the school district administration building. Really, that just looks like weaseling to me. Police officers are not trained to work with black and brown kids. They're just not. And it will inevitably lead to disproportionate punishment of students of color, that will lead to disproportionate arrests, that will make us even more firmly part of the school to prison pipeline. Okay? Is that what you want? So you feel like you're against a wall and you don't know what to do? This whole thing, this circling back to that, makes me think you guys are either desperate or you're being pushed on something, or some people want to get some money to do some things in the school district.
Say that again, Annie.
I just wonder sometimes if some people are like getting grant money or something to get these positions in the school district and they don't want to lose that money. That is, I don't know, it's just an idea that came to me. That's completely inappropriate. That's like unacceptable. What is really driving this? Really? So our nonprofit, Mediation Services of Eastern Iowa, we have community circles once a month. In August, we had one on SROs, biggest attendance ever. So here's what I learned. 3 people who went to high school in Chicago said they had SRO kind of things in their high schools, and they liked them. Here's some things they said. No uniforms, no guns. It sounded to me like they acted like floating social workers in the halls, breaking up fights, connecting with kids, giving kids rides home. So that is not what you guys are talking about. You are talking about a different presence that's going to create a different effect, that's looking through the lens of there's a problem, some people are dangerous, and you're looking at people who are culturally different from the people who are enforcing. That's just dangerous, dangerous. So one person said, I'm sorry that I'm shaking, I'm so embarrassed. One person said that her friend has an autistic kid, and she's really worried because her kid has unpredictable behaviors and unpredictable communication. So she's worried that something will happen, that behavior will be misinterpreted as dangerous, and that kid will be physically at risk. There were 2 parents who have kids in 2 of our different high schools. One said, my kids are scared during class changes. Other kids are like big and noisy and they feel unsafe. Another parent said, well, I also have girls and my kids are in a high school that's like that, and my kids don't feel unsafe. So, there's that. But the thing that was interesting was, it seemed like there wasn't anybody in the halls enforcing different kind of behavior, okay? It seemed like after the bell rang, kids were just drifting and there was no consequence. So do we jump from that? I'm going back to what Roysanne said about, are the administrators doing their work? Oh, wait, I have to go faster. So here's what you can do. Gosh, you guys, you can increase the numbers of teachers and administrators of color and actually not let teachers who are confused by the change become vigilantes and actually support them from this office being vigilantes. There's a pattern here. Have kids do circles. I agree with the mental health resources. We don't want access to personal information. Continue to train our teachers. Time's up. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Stephanie?
Hi, my name's Stephanie VanHooten, and I've worked with kids in and outside of our district. Minority kids, special education kids, kids with ADHD, kids with autism, kids with developmental delays, kids with intellectual disabilities, kids that don't necessarily respond like we think they might in schools, in public, in their homes. I worked as a homeless liaison in our district with mostly minority and special education children and their families. I was on the I am on the Johnson County Juvenile Justice Youth Development Policy Board since about 2003 or 2004. I've been on it a long, long time. I care about kids in the school-to-prison pipeline. I told you 2 weeks ago that I don't trust this administration, and there's a lot of people in our community that have no trust for this administration. I ask myself, why now? Why are we all of a sudden pulling up more visions of having an armed police officer in the ESC on a part of a threat assessment team, an armed officer that can go out into the schools and investigate our students? I ask myself what works and what doesn't work. I've been asking myself that for a lot of years, for over 20 years. I ask, what does the research say works? Not what's the popular flavor of the day, but what works. And things that we know work are to promote a family environment that supports healthy development. I don't think there's anything in this proposal that does that. I think preschool with family engagement is also on this list that the CDC puts out, that you probably all have received in your mailboxes. And we do that. We have a wonderful half-day preschool program with family engagement. I think strengthening youth skills is something that has been shown to improve safety in our schools. And I'm going to get to how we do that later. I think connecting kids to caring adults and activities is really important. Of course, that's not in this grant either, if we could see it, of course. Modifying physical and social environments. We're talking about climate here. Climate, that we have been told by independent researchers that we have a serious problem with, that is incredibly important. And those are things that make a difference. Street outreach and norm changes can make a difference. Are you seeing these things in a proposal for increasing our school safety? And if you're not, you might want to ask why. Why did we choose this proposal now? I don't think this is going to be what works, and I think it's going to harm our most vulnerable kids, those most vulnerable in our community. I think treatment to lessen the harms from violence exposure helps kids. We know that. The CDC tells us that. They can't research, but they can put the research together for us. And treatment to prevent problem behaviors and further involvement in violence. So why aren't we partnering with the people in the community that do these same things? Why are we instead partnering with the police department, which has a totally different objective than the schools, which is to educate our children and their families? I think we're doing the wrong thing.
Thank you, Stephanie. Tony? Curran?
Good evening. This is my first time addressing you as a formal body. Many of you I know, many of you I campaigned for. My name is Anthony Curran. You may call me Tony. I live at 11 Metric Road. I have no children that have attended your school district. However, I have been impressed by the Iowa City Community School District since I first got here in 1988 from Chicago. I was educated in the Chicago school system. And let me tell you, if you want to transform what you've got going in Iowa City into Chicago, SROs is a great start because I grew up with SROs. I grew up in what it was institutionalized. I mean, we went through metal detectors. It was a battle zone just to get to history class. And that wasn't the students. That was the people that were put there, they told us for our own good. And you can only be told that as a child so many times before you start to realize adults don't really understand what the meaning of the word for your own good means. It felt like a pipeline to prison. Most of the people that got in trouble with the SROs are still in prison to this day, if not dead. There were shootings in school, and not by other students. Nobody said anything. Nothing ever happened. And this is years before the Florida incident. We are talking in the schools. This is what I had to navigate. And I'll never forget one of the SROs in particular, Officer Kimbrough. And I took lunch with him every day because he wanted to protect me because I was a foster child. And I fit a particular narrative, a particular type of look for kids that the other SROs would target. And he told me, once you get in the system, kid, you never get out. Everything is linked to each other. So I say, please, listen to Annie Tucker. Listen to the good councilwoman, Masahir Saab. Listen to Supervisor Porter. Use all of the tools in your toolbox before resorting to this. I have not seen anything in Iowa City that suggests that this is an answer. This is definitely not an answer for what you have. You will destroy something that you can't fix. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Your comments and coming and staying engaged, we do appreciate it and hope you'll stay for the discussion tonight on the threat assessment. Moving into our agenda, I think we've got first the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Kim, ready to vote?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you, Kim. Consent agenda. Phil, this week you and I reviewed the bills. Do you have comments?
Yeah, this week we had $6.7 million, excuse me, worth of expenditures. A vast majority of it coming out of 22 management fund and $814,000 in the general fund. I'm with the council person here and presence in the audience. I'll say that the school district, I've had an issue with the fact that the city of Iowa City charges us for fire hydrant inspection as a commercial entity. We're a public entity and the community owns us. And I would appreciate it if you'd stop cease and desist charging us for inspecting our fire hydrants that way. And also some of the grounds requirements cost us money, which comes out of the general fund. And with those resources, we could do some other things like hire more teachers and curriculum that way. That's my spiel on that. But since you're here in your honor, I felt the opportunity to take advantage of that. But questions I had been answered. Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Phil. I had a couple questions that were answered pretty handily. Just one comment that I would like to make. I saw in the bills local organic foods that we're sourcing in our cafeterias.
Tremendous
and I
amount.
appreciate that quite a bit. It's great for our local economy. It's great food for our kids, so I really appreciate seeing that initiative proceed.
And with our county supervisor here, they've offered us land at the Port Farm. You don't have to hide, Royce-Ann. I was expecting a little plug for FFA, but I guess that's another meeting. Yes, and it's a substantial amount. Our nutrition department and staff needs to be commended going out and getting that, and it's great utilization. It helps promote locally grown food, and it fits into our climate issues and incentives as well.
That's great. Thank you for that. Are there any agenda or consent agenda items to pull? If not, is there a motion to approve consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
Kim, ready to vote?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with Directors Rotland, Ressler, Godwin, Clausen, Malone, and Eastham voting yea, and Director Hemingway voting nay.
Thank you. Public hearing, Garner Elementary School addition.
Now is the time and place for the public hearing on the proposed plans and specifications for the 2019 Garner Elementary School addition project. The Board of Directors set the date for this public hearing on August 27, 2019. Notice of public hearing was published in the Iowa City Press Citizen on August 28, 2019. The district will receive bids on this project at 2 p.m. September 26, 2019 at the Educational Services Center located at 1725 North Dodge Street, Iowa City, Iowa 52245. Notice to contractors was published as required by law in multiple statewide plan rooms and on the Iowa City Community School District website on August 28, 2019. Are there any questions from the board?
Since we have a good crowd here in the community, could Dwayne just inform the people here present exactly what the scope of this project entails?
Well, it was determined through assessments of the building that the music and art rooms were somewhat inadequate at that building and that they could benefit from having a new music and art room. So it's a simple two-room addition that will allow for that, and then some remodeling to take place in the other two rooms to, in effect, add 2 classrooms.
Are there any questions from the public?
Thank you. That concludes our public hearing. Moving on to policy review, governance transition process review. Ruthina?
Yes, we are working to reschedule our meeting that was scheduled for tonight, and we were going to tackle the 900 series, but board members should recognize the 100, 200s, and some additional changes to the 300s that we started work on last year. There are copies if you would like to see hard copies of these with Kim, and you'll notice in there's changes that are highlighted, and the ones highlighted are additions in yellow, and the ones that struck out are things in red. We're tackling the 900 series, so there'll be, right now, we did a first initial dive into it at our last meeting, so we're not nearly as far through those as we were with the other ones. So please review what's there as before. If you have questions, concerns, or something that you would like to see in that, please feel free to reach out to me or Paul or Sean. We're all 3 of us on the committee.
Perfect.
Yeah, I've gotten the hard copy versions of them and gone through, and I appreciate the work that you guys are doing, but I've got some concerns with some of these that it's kind of open-ended. Administrator salary and other compensation for 303.4. Administrator actual and necessary expenses will be paid by the district, and I guess I'd like maybe some clarity on what's considered a necessary expense and things like that, if there's a limit, things of that nature. I do like where we are expecting a report for travel. I think, is that something that you had some insight into on Chase in this as well, or? Okay, but I think that, with us spending close to, what was it, $425,000 last year for travel, that we need to have a report back to see if, the money that we're spending is prudent, if it was successful. If it's successful, we need to share that information with others in the district, and if it's not, we need to make sure that we stop going to those conferences or whatever. But and the fraternization and conflict of interest. I think the conflict of interest has to have realistic dollar amounts put on it as well.
Anything else from the governance, policy and governance committee? Thank you for the work of the committee. It's a lot of work. We will do our due diligence reviewing the updates that you're making, and look forward to the next steps on the 900 series. I know our goal is still to get this done in the October-November timeframe. We'll do our level best. I know it's a ton of work, and I do want to thank the committee for your efforts there. Moving on, we will move into our threat assessment discussion. This is a discussion on threat assessment, not SROs. I do want to note, though, there is a linkage, and our community commenters have brought that forward and highlighted that tonight and in previous meetings. This is to be a follow-up discussion on the presentation that we had last week, where we had some input from the presenters, Chief Matterly and Detective Cook, as well as the team from the University of Iowa. We didn't have a chance really to dig into the conversation. I know that we received a lot of input from community members. We've received a lot of data, and this is an opportunity for us to have the next discussion as a board and raise questions, bring up points of view, and to talk about what we would like to see going forward. And so I don't know if there are folks who want to jump in. This is an open-ended conversation tonight.
I'd like to start, actually, if you guys don't mind. First of all, I want to say a couple things. I did meet with Principal Browning last week after the incident at Tate, and I want to start by saying a couple things, because the way that I read some community comments on social media or overheard comments, Tate is an excellent school. There was a lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot, there were a few people that just said, oh, it's Tate. That stuff happens there. It doesn't just happen there, it's Tate. Tate is an awesome school. The kids that come out of that school are determined. They want to they are just like our regular high school students. They were featured on National Geographic's Instagram story for their climate protest. There was India, I think there was Portugal, I can't remember, there's like 3 or 4 countries, and there was Iowa, and the students that were there was Tate students. The one thing that was glaring when I met with Ann, she did an excellent job. She walked me through the whole process of what happened. But what she did say is that the staff can't do it alone. They do need some help. She wasn't asking me for SROs. I'm not in favor of SROs. We've had this discussion up here. I don't think anybody on this board has said they've been in favor of SROs, and I haven't asked you all, but I assume that hasn't changed. It hasn't changed for me. The importance of the threat assessment team is something that I see, and if it has an officer at the ESC, if the officer is stationed at the police department, however it may be, the point of it is we want a team, and it's like what Roy Sand said. We need a team of people coming together, groups coming together that can help. I was disappointed, and this was the same way at Southeast last year, by the administration staff, that there was no follow-up from the administration with the principals or the staff. Okay, and I know that there was. I know Kate went over to Tate, but I don't know that anybody else did. At the time that I talked to Ann, no one else did. No one had reached out to her. That worries me, and that's one of the reasons that I would like to have a threat assessment team or team of individuals, because that's a direct contact. That person should be the one that gets called and has to respond. It's my understanding that the phone call came in here and they had to leave a voicemail at one point during that whole thing at Tate. That's unacceptable to me. And so, as I've said, I'm not for SROs in the district. I want to be able to help the teachers and the staff and the administrators at those schools be able to handle situations like this and to be safe. Being out in the community and talking about this, I've taken some flack for my stance on that. And I often hear, well, you don't care about the safety of the kids and the teachers in our community. And I laugh at that now because my wife is a teacher. My kids are both in this district. It'd be silly for me to say that I don't care about that. And even if they weren't teachers or students, I'm serving on this board because I care about kids and teachers. I listen to them. I have that. That's just part of my quality. I care about them. So I do want them to be safe. I went to school here. I realized times have changed. But they've only changed slightly. I mean, they've changed because we've always had drugs in our schools. There's always been sex problems. There's always been drinking. But the things that have changed have been social media. Smoking maybe has changed to vaping, which can be a little bit different. People have more access to guns and things of that nature. Now, we talked about what things can we do to be safe, and you talked about metal detectors. We've heard about that. Go home and ask your students if metal detectors would help. And the only reason I say that is because when I asked my daughter that, she said no. If a student wanted to get into school, they could have multiple doors. She's like, students let kids in all the time. They're not just going to go through that one point of entry. If a student really, or anybody from the outside really wanted to get something into our schools, they'd find a way to get around the metal detectors. So I'm not for that part either. I'm curious what's happening now in our schools, and maybe Steve or Amy or Matt can answer this, but is there currently a consistent police presence in our school? We've heard there's police officers at Northwest before and after school. Is it because there's safety concerns there? Is it helping? Who chooses for them to be there? Northwest isn't the only school. I'm just using that as an example. I do agree that we need mental health supports to increase, and if you guys recall, there were 8 recommendations from the safety committee, and some of those other recommendations did specifically call that part of it out. A lot of the discussion has been for SROs in the secondary schools, but how are we going to provide support to the elementary schools? I also wanted to point out that I don't have the history on all the school shootings, but the ones that come to mind are they're not students in the school that decided to do this, it was outside, and they come in. So having the SROs in the school at the time may not always work. A good example for that, Parkland shooting. That SRO was outside and never came inside. In fact, they got fired for that. And I'll just end my little rant here. I was watching TV the other day, and a commercial for Mayor Pete came on. I'm not saying I'm endorsing him or anything, but I did think that it was interesting what he said in that commercial. And I'll abbreviate a little bit. But he said, "I've seen what we can achieve when we have each other's backs, but today we are divided at each other's throats." And then he went on to say, our youth are learning active shooter drills before they learn to read. To meet these challenges, we need real solutions, not polarization. Acting together to conquer these challenges is the only way forward. And I really think that our community needs to come together, all of our resources. We need to have a plan. We need to be able to put that in place to help our administrators, and that's how we're going to move forward. If it's the threat assessment team that helps, I think we have to do that. I think we just need to figure out what it looks like, but we've got to move forward. But I just want to reiterate as I'm closing my comments here, not in support of SROs at this time, as I don't think any of the other members of the board up here, and I'll let them speak to that themselves.
Sean?
Because of some of the comments of our speakers tonight, I wanted to make sure we were responding and being very open. I am not in favor of SROs either, and I think it's fair for all of us to give our opinion on it right tonight and do that. One of the things that struck out to me that Royce Ann had said was, where's the team? What the idea behind it when we first heard it, not at the last meeting when everybody was sitting up here, but when we had a work session about it, I kind of got that same feeling like the district-wide threat assessment team would be a nice way to start things. And I think, where's the team, I believe was the words Royce Ann said, and I think that that's our fault. I think everybody is kind of waiting for somebody else to do something. Are we waiting for this grant to see if we even have money to then figure out what we want to do? Is the chief and the folks that came to talk to us waiting for us to tell them what we want? Are we waiting for them to tell us what we want? And it's on us to decide what we want to see in our district. Whether the grant goes through or doesn't go through, that's a whole separate thing. How would we pay for whatever it is we want to do? We'd have to figure that out. But I think we keep waiting for something else to happen before we land on that. If we were to get a threat assessment team with the picture that we were given of these several groups that are coming together and really evaluating what are the needs of the students and how can we best make sure that all of those kids have the resources they need. And that's the approach. I think that helps to make everyone feel safer. Again, the SROs, part of it keeps getting lumped into it, and maybe, again, that's on us that we don't, at each time we have a meeting, flat out say, I'm not in favor of SROs, so we're going to start doing that, or at least I'm going to start doing that until, it's pretty clear that, at least we have a majority of folks up here that are going to say that. But I do think we need to do something. I think we do have areas of improvement. We've made our buildings, I think, pretty physically safe with all the improvements that we've done on it. I think we need to, really talk about, what do we want to see as that threat assessment team. And I think it's fair to bring in the public and say what all are the types of resources we need to put into it. The different entities that were mentioned, the juvenile justice and all of those things, I think need to be part of that conversation. And they probably have not been part of that conversation because we haven't said, let's bring these people in and be part of that conversation. So I think we need to own the fact that it has not moved in a direction. And I think that does not help the community to have a sense of security that they know what's going on. If we're not actively doing something, then anything could be happening. So I think that's what we need to do, is actively go out there and seek out the help of these different entities and form the picture of what we want for our district. And then at least the unsurety will be eased a bit, and then I think we can move forward together.
Who wants to go next? I think we're all ready with comments tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of folks, a lot of what people are saying. I'm not in favor of SROs, and I think, this is, and I wish we'd done a little different in the committee. This is why you have a board member on that committee at that time, is to say, the community won't support this. Let's not spend any more time talking about it. And Paul was on the committee, but not on the side that talked about SROs. And now we have spent, am I correct, that we didn't have a board member on the hardening side?
Yeah, I was on the south.
Yeah, so the side that recommended SROs didn't have a board member. And so I think it's probably pretty clear our community, our public school community, isn't in favor of this. And I don't remember the last time you had 7 board members over the previous boards, many boards, come so strongly on a thing, and it's because that's our job, is to listen to the community and to go out and have a wider view of this rather than just in the schools. And so there's a bit of a disconnect with that. And I think part of the reason we haven't moved fast is we've spent a lot of time talking about something that was never going to be considered. And we're still dedicating time to this, and we're getting folks in the community confused, upset, more fearful. I mean, there are folks in our community, when they think about the police, absolutely fear for their children in regards to that, right? However, our Iowa City police might act. We have North Liberty Police that might act one way. We have Coralville Police that might act another way. We have the Sheriff's Department that might act another way. And more than that, we have a huge national narrative, right, of police interacting with people of color. That's where you have to think about, I have to talk to my child and give them specific tips on how not to get killed when they encounter people who are supposed to keep them safe. That's very real for people. I happen to think one thing I've learned a lot is I think Iowa City Police Department is doing a great job. I think their practices are what we need to aspire to as a district. But we're not there in a lot of ways. Our data are showing us our culture isn't welcoming enough for families of color, and we know that. And so we have to kind of get our house in order, for one thing, and try all these other things that work. I think, the fact that law enforcement have been involved on discussions about the threat assessment team, but we haven't brought in the courts or the mental health professionals, I think we're behind on that. So I do think we need to, because I agree with what Paul said, our folks do need to know what to do when the an incident like that happens, or when there is a credible threat, or when there is a kid says they're going to harm themselves or other people. They have to know what to do. They have to have a playbook, and that has to include lots of different people. I guess I'm not sure why it has to include an armed officer who works for the school district. I don't know why that would be an requirement. It would be the first time we hire, because that's kind of what one proposal is. We would hire an armed officer that may or may not work for the school district. So I don't, it's kind of in the model. The Dewey-Cornell model includes those. So I just want to reiterate, we're not in favor of SROs. I don't anticipate that 4 new members who are for SROs are going to be elected in November. I don't think that will happen. I'm very, very, very concerned. I really have to, before I'm going to vote for anything, I got to know what data are we collecting, who gets access to it, where do we keep it, how can you give me a better guarantee than Pearson can give me on security, a better guarantee than some of these companies that, may or may not place cybersecurity hard. I just got to know that the school district isn't going to jeopardize mental health data, and that we're not going to be, that we keep that safe, because that's not a no harm. That's not a neutral thing. It could damage people, and I want to be careful that, we as the elected folks and as the government body don't damage our constituents. And I think it goes back to transparency. I mean, this, I can dig in this and I can see how this can work. And when it's explained to me about how it's a wraparound type of a thing that's going to have follow-up as soon as we're going to follow up with kids after something has happened, that's great. But I think we're going to have to get out in front of the transparency, because that's what's killing us is from moving forward is this lack of trust. And the only way we can build it is to be as open and honest as possible. And obviously then earn it over time. But in the beginning, we've got to be as open. This did come up out of nowhere. It's true. We did not hear about this as a board until it was already in process. So I think that sets us back. And maybe the intent was, well, we got to get ahead of this. There's a grant, and we have an opportunity, and I understand that. But the impact has been delay, consternation, confusion. And so I think we're going to have to get a lot better with our transparency and just get out front and be really honest and not get distracted, by the SRO conversation. So that's kind of where I stand, and hopefully the community hears that message. And we can kind of move on and talk about the productive things and the constructive things about what should this look like, who should be involved, and how will it work to really support our kids.
Keep going down this line. So I'm going to say for the public, for the audience, for people watching, I do not support SROs either. I have not once said I've supported SROs. I do, though, as a board member, as a community member, as a mother of an 8th grader at Southeast Junior High, feel an enormous responsibility for a number of issues in our district. One, physical safety. We've talked about that a lot for students, teachers, staff, volunteers. I feel an enormous responsibility regarding the disproportionality that we have in our district. I have a huge goal. Our board has a big goal around addressing culture, climate, equity, care. It's one of our board goals. We talk about it all the time. We had a great presentation at Liberty High last week around PBIS and how that is helping the culture at Liberty High. I want to see more of that, and that is one of our goals this year, is to extend our implementation of PBIS at our secondary schools. I think that will make a difference. We've talked about mental health. It's a major issue. We've talked about vaping, drug use, those kinds of issues. We've talked about class size. We've heard a lot last week or last board meeting. We've got big classes. We have a lot of things that we have to do as a district. And for me, as a board member, as a community member, as the mother of an 8th grader, a son at Southeast Junior High, for me, status quo is not an option in any of those matters. But we have to find a way of addressing them all in a way that's balanced, that we don't go too far on one and takes us out of balance on another. We have to address all these pieces together, and we need to move forward deliberately, transparently, very responsibly, with those set of goals in mind, and move us forward. It's not going to be easy. And we do have to operate with transparency. I agree very much with everything that JP and Paul and Sean has said about transparency. We need to, I believe, start a dialogue around what a threat assessment process could look like that would be responsive to our community. I'm not talking about solving it with a police officer in our schools. I don't think we need a police officer. I don't think we need SROs right now. I don't think we need a district official that's a police officer sitting at the ESC. I do think we need someone to help coordinate the process of bringing our community members together to talk about safety in our schools. How can we address them? All the pieces and the ingredients to solve this problem together. We need someone to help organize those discussions. And that's what I'm supporting is someone at the district level who can help have the time and energy and exclusive remit and focus to drive this conversation forward in a transparent way with all the proper people at the table. We're going to keep coming up, unless we do this correctly, we'll be here 2 years from now. We'll have the same conversation with a different board with perhaps tragic consequences on our hands to live with. We have to do this well. We have to engage our community. We need to be transparent. We need to take our time. This is my humble opinion. And this is not going to happen overnight. It takes a lot of hard work. We need, I believe, that resource to help us coordinate it, bring the stakeholders together, build what that process is, because right now we are bringing police into our schools in an ad hoc way every time an incident happens, and I am concerned that we're overreacting in some cases and underreacting in others because we don't have the playbook that JP mentioned. That, I think, a threat assessment process can help us develop a set of protocols, engaging the right people based on the type of incident that's occurring, with the proper follow-up, the proper support along the way. But right now it's ad hoc. We can't operate that way, in my humble opinion. So I would like to see us get a resource, whether it's through a grant or we talked about Plan B, C, D. How do we get a resource in place to drive this forward and begin the community engagement, understand what our threat assessment for the Iowa City Community School District looks like, not for Virginia somewhere, not for somewhere else. What does it mean for our community? Build that. Start building that playbook, start understanding who's part of it, and then start practicing. Start small, start practicing, learn from the experience, and then decide, based on real life experience, what we do next. So ad hoc is not for me. Status quo is unacceptable. I don't support SROs. I don't want to talk about those. We're not ready to have that conversation now, maybe ever. We need to start small. We need to engage our community, be transparent. So thank you for listening to my rant of the evening. So who's next?
I don't disagree with anything that's been said. I also want to say on record that I do not support student resource officers in our schools. I don't support having an armed officer employed by our district, even in the ESC. I do appreciate that our administrators have put time and effort, and I do appreciate the letter that they sent us. I know that our administrators feel just as concerned as we all feel about our students' safety, and I believe that they're coming to us with the intent of wanting safety for our children, and I don't think that I do think they understand the issues of disproportionality and all those issues. I do think that we need to work with them, and I would like there to be more of a community discussion between our administrators and our community members, juvenile court, juvenile justice, folks, all the other crisis. Thank you, Rising. Yes, and I would like to see all of these folks come together and have this discussion together. And I do want to say again, though, I don't think it needs to be an armed officer. I am a mental health professional, so I'm biased, but I really believe a mental health professional would do good work in this role. And I think I would prefer for us not to involve law enforcement. I recognize I don't work in the school. I'm not facing what you face every day. Dr. Schultz, thank you for being here tonight. So I appreciate you sharing your perspective with us, but I do want us to work together on this. And it feels a little bit like we're working against each other. It certainly feels to me when we have community commenters that come week after week with the impression that we are somehow supportive of student resource officers. It feels to me like there's a disconnect somewhere. And I really think we all care equally about the safety of our children. I think our administrators aren't pushing for things that, I mean, maybe they have a different view on how they think things should be addressed, but I really do have faith in them. And I appreciate all the work that they do for our students. That said, I completely agree with what JP said. We need to get our house in order. We need to work on our behavior statistics. We need to work on our disproportionality within our district. And I really believe mental health professionals would help us do that. And I think that's all I have to say, but I just want to say one more time, I don't think it needs to be an armed officer. I'm not, as a parent, actually, I'm not really, I'm not comfortable with it being an armed officer. I think we can do this work. I do think we need a threat assessment team. I desperately agree that we need a threat assessment team. And I want to work towards that as a community together with our administrators and the board together to come to that end. And as they've asked us to do that with haste, I think it is urgent. It is something we need to work on urgently. So, thank you.
Well, I'll start with, first off, I want to thank everyone in the community that came and spoke this evening and who has shared their views with us. I think that's important. We are your representatives, and everything we are is owned by the community. When this first came before us, I asked for a copy of the application. It was not given, and as it was stated that it was an online deal. I don't have the capability of doing it, but I know people can when they make an application that way, save it. At that first meeting, I did ask Chief Matterly to provide a list of the people that he stated would be a part of a threat assessment team, and that was given to me today at 3:34. And I can read off, and I'm sure, Kim, this can be made available to anyone after the meeting, right? I mean, we can make it available to the public. But what is listed here, and it's underlined several times, could. Doesn't mean that it is, but could participate on a Johnson County team. Under police, it has Johnson County Sheriff's Office, University of Iowa Police, Iowa City Police Department, Coralville Police Department, North Liberty, University Heights, Johnson County Department of Human Services, Johnson County Crisis Center, Johnson County Jail Alternative, Johnson County Attorney's Office. Under education, it has the University of Iowa, Kirkwood Community College, Iowa City School District, Grantwood AEA. Under hospital, it has the Iowa City VA, UIHC, Iowa City Mercy, 5th Judicial Department of Corrections, Johnson County. It says 5th. Okay, well, it's a misprint. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. Johnson County Juvenile Courts, Domestic Violence Intervention Program, and the Rape Victims Advocate Program. And by my count, that's 21 organizations that this information would be shared with. I have concerns with the sharing of. I mean, it's in many of these instances there are information that pieces of information aren't shared in that. But I also have concerns with that many entities having information and first, rights of privacy and those things. I, as a candidate, have never supported SROs, although there is one individual in our community who no longer lives here, Henry Harper, who is now living in East St. Louis, who was a community outreach officer, unarmed, tried to go into our schools and establish relationships with students at an elementary school, and a previous staff member and board member had problems with that. Henry Harper has been recognized by the Cedar Rapids African American Museum as a leader, by the State of Iowa African American Museum. And a tremendous individual, had great potential here, but had been blackballed by this district for employment. And he is, and let's not mistake ourselves. We do pay for law enforcement with guns to be on our school grounds. If you go to a football game, if you go to those things, they're there. But Henry Harper would have been just the ideal candidate for a situation, because he can speak to youth, he can speak to troubled youth, he can get youth on the right path. I still do not support SROs, but I feel that discussions are valuable. I feel that I also have a problem with a grant that wasn't directed by the board to go after, although I know they go after things, but I mean, the board directed the administration to start an ag program, and there were grants available to them there, and nothing was done, except put it in the course book. And I think it's important that our schools be welcoming and inviting to everyone. And if we're truly concerned, and don't get this wrong, but if we're truly concerned about loss of life and loss of young life, we'd make swimming a graduation requirement, because there's a greater likelihood of a student drowning than being in a school shooting. As tragic and horrific as they are, thank God they're relatively infrequent. But when they happen, they're gut-wrenching, and they're horrible, and they're tragic, and that. And all of the $6.8 million, or $6 to $8 million we spent on safety and security after Sandy Hook was essentially putting in safety measures that were defeated at Sandy Hook. And, after the Titanic, there wasn't a large amount of boat builders going out buying blueprints to try and duplicate it. But it's important that the community be involved in these discussions, and the board members have spoke about transparency and openness. That's absolutely what has to happen. And the community has given us great guidance and great comments and everything on those lines. But on the record, I mean, I feel that the training and everything that would be required for an SRO that hasn't been presented to us, and what it would mean in our school district would be different, I think would be unique. There's a lot of schools, and I guess we get the statistics, we're one of the few large schools that doesn't have one. And I talk to a lot of people around the place, and they say they have them. When I visited the Des Moines Metro, the big Career and Tech Center in Des Moines, which Mike Rowe used as an example for the nation. They have a uniform police officers you come in. Doesn't seem to be an issue with the students there and things like that. But our community is different. I don't support SROs at this time, because the only person that I could see in that role no longer lives here. But we do have our students, when they graduate our buildings, will be in a world where there will be uniformed officers and things like that. So a relationship with law enforcement should be seen as positive, not negative. But I understand that there's issues with some in our community with that. But in our situation, we don't have the money for a lot of things educationally we need to do that way. So I'm concerned that, you know, our focus should be on education, and I appreciate the letter from our principals and everything today, but they are ultimately responsible for the discipline and the climate and the climate of their buildings. And as our surveys have shown, we've got a ways to go there to make sure that everyone feels welcomed and appreciated and valued. And that I think is the most important thing we should be focusing on, is making sure that everyone is valued, everyone is welcomed, and everyone is appreciated. And their voices are just as equal as all of the students.
All right, so it's my turn. I won't rehash a lot of what have been said, but I do want to thank those who have come before us time and time again to share their thoughts and concerns about the proposals, not only the threat assessment, but SROs, especially our building administrators, but a huge thank you to our students who have been brave enough to come forward and share their opinion and thoughts. So I want to personally thank you for taking the time out to be at a board meeting that you could probably be doing something else. Know that you are being heard. I would like to hear more voices from our students, because after all, if it wasn't for our students, we wouldn't be here. So we want to make sure that when we say we have voices at the table, it includes our students as well, and not just those that share my opinion. I recognize that my opinion may not be shared with lots of people. The last time I made my comments, I got emails and phone calls that I shouldn't base my decisions on what I lived through. Guess what? I'm going to base my decisions on not only what I lived through, what my family lived through, and what other people of color have shared with me what they lived through. SROs. Nor will I ever support SROs in our buildings. I grew up in a district that had that. And just like Tony said, it created a prison to pipeline. I know some of my best friends got in trouble. Like you said, they're in prison still to this day, or dead. I don't want that for our district. Do we have safety concerns? I'm hearing from our buildings that we do. Are putting officers in our school going to solve that? I don't believe so. I have not seen any research that says it will do that. You can pick and choose. You can find some research that says, oh, they solve problems. I can give you 10 more articles that say they do not. As a district, we need to figure out what works for us. Right now, and I don't know what our current annual report will show, our last annual report, I commented the last time we had this discussion, showed that we disproportionately discipline minority children and children with special needs. And I was told, because that's what we did by the book. Well, then maybe our book is wrong, because I just can't believe that those students are somehow breaking those rules more than any other student. Now, I'm gonna have to say I agree with Lori. I think a threat assessment plan team is definitely needed. I'm not there yet to say an armed officer has to be the one that coordinates this. And so this is just my apology. I can't speak for the other 7 up here. But I want to say I apologize. I did not do what I was elected to do, and that was to give leadership to our administrators. They can't do anything without us saying, hey, I like the threat assessment program. Let's bring in these voices to the table to figure out how that works. So I apologize not only to our community members, but to our administrators. I was not clear in saying I want to get a group together and discuss this in more details on how we can make this work and address the issues that we keep hearing from our community. That's what I would hope we do as a board going forward. Decide that We've talked about this enough. All 7 of us have said no to SROs. That's not part of the conversation. How do we make what we are saying that we want to see and what some members in the community said that they're willing to discuss, but not just ramrod it through without getting everybody at the table that will be part of that? Because we have people saying they've never heard of the threat assessment. Our police are fantastic when they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. That it's not their job to tell us how to protect our schools. We have to figure that out, work with community partners, and get that in place. That's what I'm hoping we as a board can say and do tonight.
Can we? I think we can. I think we've all said something along those lines, that we want to see no SROs, status quo, we've got to do something, community engagement, transparency, good process, and we need someone to coordinate it, and we're not talking about an officer who's going to coordinate that work. We're talking about someone who works at the district to take the lead, to create the community engagement and the process for solving this properly. It's going to take time, it's going to take our commitment, it's going to take our leadership, and we're probably already getting emails. And it's going to take, our fortitude, and we have an election coming up, might be different group of us up here, but we're going to have to keep the momentum moving forward, and I really, really want to get this process kicked off, underway, making some effort and an initiative on this, even before the election if possible, knowing that that's coming up.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the reason that we keep putting it on our agenda and discussing it is because we want to have those conversations, and that's just not where we're going, but it keeps being interpreted in newsprint and others that we're talking about SROs, but we really want, what we've all set up here is we want to have this team put together, and that's the direction that we need to move, but we need to move on it so that our administrators and our staff and our principals, they have direction and they have the resources they need, because in both instances at Southeast, at Tate, when I talked to the staff and the principals after those situations happened, they both just said, we're not trained or ready or sure what to do on this. We just want to be able to have that support. And I think that's kind of what comes through in the letter too, is that they need, the principals feel they need the support for safety reasons, and I agree with that.
Well, and we had an incident at West High when we first got on early, and very similar. And definitely there was no corrective measure well enough then to change it. So, I mean, this is a reoccurring problem. We have to get ahead of it.
So what do we need to do at this point? We've said we want somebody to coordinate the communication regarding this, the conversation.
Yep. I think Steve wanted to make a comment.
So just a couple things to share. First of all, I'll jump ahead on the agenda item there because I think it's pertinent to the conversation that you just had. Kate did have some conversation with the folks that are that we turn to look for some resources to provide that threat assessment coordinator, and they shared with us that they are delaying their final determination, and it's unlikely we'll hear back on that grant application until January 1st. Then the other thing I'd do is I'd refer to the document that we provided at the last meeting where we talked about the threat assessment coordinator, clearly a civilian. Talked about somebody with a bachelor's degree in education or a related field, experience working with kids, but really, again, that person that you just described that could bring those resources together, both work internally with our staff, but then work externally with a list of groups such as Phil just described there in terms of our community assets. But knowing that the funding for that's uncertain, and that was a question that came up at an earlier work session, is how do we pay for this? I think it's important for us as a educational organization to step up and say we're going to have to put some money behind this, and the directive that we need to do that, and that we need to bring a budget back to you that says that as of July 1st we'll create a budget that includes that office and that person, recognizing that we'll have to make some budgetary sacrifices in order to do that. But I think that also gives us time to have that community engagement that you talked about that says when that person comes in, what do we expect them to do? We've got the responsibilities described in structured fashion here that, on that one pager, but certainly not in detail. And I think that would give us the opportunity to really flesh that out. What are our expectations for a person in that role? We talked a little bit internally there about who we expect them to work with, but to Phil's point, who do we expect them to work with externally? So I think that gives us that opportunity to both better describe the position and the purpose behind it, so that when we get to the point where we have funds available for it, that we're actually able to put someone in place who can do that work.
So who's going to lead the work to do the community engagement, to actually work up what a threat assessment team looks like, to actually get to the point of understanding the budget? I mean, I feel like...
Well, I think we need to do that now.
I agree,
Yeah.
and I would like to see what that proposal looks like. So who's going to lead that effort, sort of what is the process? We can be very transparent about how we're going to engage, the timeline, and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I mean-
and we can definitely put that together and bring that back to you.
I mean, I
and-
think we're saying we need to see some movement, some action, some next steps, some forward momentum. If we have to wait for a new person to be funded for the next fiscal year, I don't think that's what we're saying. I think we need to make sure that we go through that process, engaging, and it needs to be a good, transparent process. People need to know what to expect. We need to be able to go where people are, not just have meetings at a high school or whatever at 6 o'clock at night. I mean, it's understanding how do we need to properly engage all of our constituents, school, admin, the group of stakeholders that we've talked about tonight. But we need to get started on that. And it's a big job, and so I'm just curious if you can come back at the next meeting and describe what that would look like. Is that a reasonable next step? I'm looking at my directors for
Well, I'm wondering if,
fine-tuning.
you know, how do you make it happen, and what does that format look like? And I'm thinking that, you know, a town hall type format with people actively invited to participate. And by people, I mean the, you know, all of the different entities that have been described already, right? To send at least one representative to it and have the conversation to how do we move forward and get some steps there instead of us guessing what next steps should be, get some direction there, and then we can internalize it and start to, you know, push it forward. But I think that's the starting point, right, is to get that involvement on the front end to figure out what the team looks like. Because as Phil listed off the list that Chief Matterly gave him, it didn't include several of those groups, and it's going to, you know, you can't have a threat assessment team that has 40 people on it either, right? So I think the direction from those groups needs to start at the beginning in order to create a team that's going to be effective in the end.
Well,
So
I
that's
think
the format I would see us doing.
And I think
it.
one of the things that's really important is to address the concerns that people had about data out there. If you look at what we described as the threat assessment team and the one pager that we shared with you, it didn't include any external folks. I think one of the things that we looked at was an internal threat assessment team that looks at an issue and says, given the nature of the issue, is this something that we ought to reach out to the crisis center for? Or do we reach out to law enforcement? Or are we reaching out to the court system? And having that person in place who can make that determination in conjunction with our building administrators, and then seek the appropriate external resources, not have, you know, Sean, as you said, 45 people sitting around the table trying to decide that. But that small internal group that's able to, on a regular, and Janet, to your point, systemic and systematic process, make those determinations and then connect the right external resources with our teams internally, I think helps them move in the right direction. But I think that community engagement helps us make sure that we've appropriately defined the position and the responsibilities, because that'll be key in finding the right person to fulfill that role.
Well, and I know I've said this at other meetings, and I forgot to put it in my discussion, is that, you know, when the incident happened at West very early on when I was elected, I talked with the U of I team, and I was talking to them about threat assessment, and I remember one of the officers there corrected me and said, we're care assessment. Mm-hmm. And every instance is not necessarily a threat, but it's an individual that needs care. And we need to be, you know, granted there will be legitimate threats, but the vast majority is going to be someone who needs assistance, either mental or some type of support, And that's what we're supposed to do, and put that individual in contact with the necessary group that can provide the support or assistance that that person needs. And I think, I hate to just play the word game with it, but I think that we also have to make sure that the care component is a driving portion of the conversation.
Completely agree. I think that's a good point. Words matter. Words matter. And how we choose them. And there was a comment from one of our speakers, I think it was Tony, on the institutionalization of some of our responses. And we have an opportunity as a community to do this differently. I'm still resonating with the PBAS presentation from Liberty because of the progress that school has made, focusing on really positive and supports. And it's making a difference. Their data's showing it's making a difference. Now, I'm sure other things that we need to be doing, but that's focusing on climate, it's focusing intentionally on culture, it's changing the way we talk about things and how we respond and work with students and teachers. That model supports teachers as well. I mean, it's holistic. And so we have an opportunity to do this differently. We have an opportunity to not fall prey to that institutionalization of racism, of disproportionality, and those sorts. We have an opportunity. We've got a unique district. Look at this community that's come here tonight, week after week after week, to provide their input. Faculty, staff, community members, we have an opportunity to do something differently, and I think this may be our moment to do just that. So our next meeting, we will have, we need to have a process that we can talk about, that we can put a timeline to, that we can start executing and working against, so that we can make progress for the work that we've talked about tonight. Yeah?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks. Anything else on that one? Okay, we've got a couple action items. I'm sorry, I'm just logging back in. The first one is around a resolution to approve the request for allowable growth to the School Budget Review Committee.
Recommend approval of the resolution to approve the request for allowable growth to the School Budget Review Committee for the special education deficit for the year ending June 30th, 2019.
Second.
Any discussion?
I want to take a moment. I mean, I'm a special ed teacher. I know how much things cost. I remember when our special ed deficit was $1 million. And so I just want to note, I know that I've bragged often about my role in our high teacher salaries, and I'm proud of that. But it's growing by a lot, and it isn't going to be sustainable, right? I mean, is it going to be 50 million one day? Is it 16? So we've gone from $1 million at one point, and now we're looking at a very large, almost $9 million number, right? $8,714,000. So I just want to point that out. That's a reality, and I know what the costs are for, and I know we have to spend the money. We have to legally spend the money. But I believe PBIS, a really good multi-tiered systems of support, is overall also going to help with things like this, that we can find smarter ways to do this where we're not just putting money at the problem. And I know that's what we're working on. I know everybody's doing their best to do that, but I don't feel I'd be doing my job if I didn't point out that we've gone from $1 million at one point to coming up on a very, very large number. So.
And maybe one point, because I think people lose sight of it, one of the major frustrations is that when IDEA was passed, the federal government promised 100% funding. They are not even close to that, and as special education costs across the country rise, and the requirements that the federal government passes on to the state and then the school district continue to either exist as they were at that time, or in many cases have become much weightier for school districts, they have chosen not to continue a program that would escalate the funding of that to at least approach a portion of what they originally promised when they passed IDEA.
I don't think they've ever even funded 20%.
No, they have not.
19 was the highest.
That's correct, and they've gone back and forth, and it's it's unfortunate.
We have a motion and a second. Any further conversation? Hearing none, Kim, we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you. Next up is a resolution to approve requests for modified supplemental amounts for limited English program costs.
So moved.
Second.
Any conversation?
Maybe if I could just offer one quick
Yep.
note, just a reminder for folks that our limited English proficiency population has changed dramatically in the last decade. It's up well over 400%. Providing services with students levels 1 to 7. And the state has gotten more aggressive about providing some ability to support those students, but has yet to fully fund that, hence us going through this process.
Thanks, Steve. Any comments, questions? Hearing none, Kim, we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you. Agenda setting for the October 8th meeting. We've got our public forum items, consent agenda. We just talked about, I think, is this another discussion item or is it presentation around the next steps on?
I think it'd be a discussion item.
Okay, perfect. We've got a couple other discussion items. One's elementary school boundary change update around attendance support busing, after-school program access, and then update on Roosevelt Elementary. Anything else? Okay, that's our agenda, please.
Well, and I don't know if it's here at some point in time, but maybe an update on building utilization for our upcoming caucuses.
Got it, okay.
We can certainly provide that. We're in the process of working with both the Republican and Democratic teams to
Okay.
understand their building needs. So we've been in regular dialogue with them. I can check with them and see if they have it ready by that time, and if not, we'd certainly be ready to
It may be
meeting
early,
after
but
that.
if there's something that we can have there
Sure.
and update on that.
And then playground committee update, that's coming later in October, Phil?
I think our goal is around this time. We're meeting tomorrow.
Okay.
You could leave an opening in case we're ready to give it. Our goal is to get it in at that time.
Second meeting of October.
Second meeting.
Second meeting?
Okay.
Okay, then that's.
But Phil
even
is,
be- that's
sorry,
even-
Phil, but he's right
That's
there.
even better.
Yep.
Because we've been going through a lot of material and things like that, and we want to make sure that when we give the best product to the board at that time and
Okay.
give the best direction.
We'll slot that in for the second meeting in October and keep us posted on progress. Anything else for next agenda? Okay, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.